right, I want to welcome those who will also be joining us for the Morehead Church of Christ Wednesday evening Bible study. We are studying through the book of Judges. And this is an important study because we really learn the history of really what happened after Joshua passed away and before Israel had their first king, King Saul. Many commentators refer to the period of the Judges as the Dark Ages. In other words, this seems to be sort of the worst of the time of Israel because everybody was doing what was right in their own eyes. That there was a lot of things that were going on here with God's people, the cycles of being faithful, falling away, being oppressed, crying out for deliverance, and then coming back to faithfulness. That happened 6 times through the book of Judges, and we are on the final cycle of these cycles with Samson. And so we're going to pick up in a lesson today in verse 10 of chapter 14. But you'll recall, I'm just going to summarize the first 9 verses, is that Samson is introduced in chapter 13. In chapter 14, he sees a woman in a city called Timnah, and apparently this city belongs to the Philistines. And this is really, he's attracted by her beauty. He's attracted to her sexually. He tells his parents to get this woman for his wife, and against the good advice of his parents, telling him essentially this is really contrary to the law of God, said that they were not to marry outside of their own people. Samson does it anyway. In verse 4, we learned that God essentially, even if Samson is in rebellion to his word in relation to marrying this woman, he's going to use it as far as the deliverance of his people. He's going to use it as sort of an antagonistic way to really break free from the oppression of the Philistines. And so Samson, the parents of Samson make arrangements with her parents for a marriage. And when we get to verse 10 there, we're talking about a wedding feast that's going to take place. So I
just had a quick question. Going back to earlier in the chapter where he talked about, he told his parents to go and, basically find her and he wants to marry her. That's not how it would normally go. Like, I imagine, like, what the parents should have said is like, no, we're not going to do that, or...
Right. Well, I think
gift bang God.
Yeah. So really, in a betrothal, that would be typically what happens. So it's we're talking about arranged marriages, and so it wouldn't be like the man and the woman making, hey, you know what? I like you, you like me, or we love each other. Let's get married. This is done in advance when they're both younger, and this is all set up, and then at some appointed time. When they get into young adulthood, then they get married. I think typically men were in their 20s. I'm going to say girls were usually 13, 14 years old. We think, wow, that was really young. In our culture, it probably would be, but these people were mature enough at that time that they realized this is a serious responsibility, and so this was all arranged in advance by the parents.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, but the main question is like, instead of him being like, yeah, I want to marry her, even though you're not supposed to do that.
Right.
The parents should have been like, no, we're not gonna do that.
Yeah.
Right? That's kind of how it's supposed to be.
Well, that's what you wish they would have said. I mean, they did put up they kind of protested what he wanted them to do, but it seems like in the end they sort of caved into his wishes. And the thing is they shouldn't have done that. They should have refused to do it. In other words, if you're going to refuse to obey the will of God, then we're going to refuse to go set up this marriage with you. And it only seems like he saw this woman, so he didn't even really know her, because it says he saw her and she looked good to him, and it's like, hey, get that one for me to marry. They shouldn't have done it, because the marriage was not something that God wanted with people outside. There was a real concern. And remember, we looked at verses, the idea of intermarrying essentially means that you're going to accept their practices, or they're going to bring their practices to you.
Yeah, I just didn't know if they,
Yeah.
normally, the son wouldn't have that much power normally to
Yeah.
override the parents' will like that.
Right. Well, it shouldn't happen, but it did happen, unfortunately.
Well, at the time, was that, like the best way, strategy to take down the Philistines? It seems
Yeah.
like it was sin, but
Well, this was more of a selfish thing for Samson. I
I
don't
know
think it was,
that.
yeah, it
I
wasn't
know
that he
was
really,
disobedient.
yeah, it was really not like he think, I'm gonna do this because I'm gonna use this to
Well, no.
Yeah.
He did that, but it says something earlier on last study that this God knew that this was
Yeah,
gonna be
verse 4.
a
yeah.
good way to take down the
Right, so
Philistines.
that's what I'm
So-
saying is God can use even situations that are against his will to accomplish his will. Verse 4 is really, he's going to use it providentially to bring about the downfall of the Philistines.
Okay.
Yeah, so, let's read our text, here in chapter 14. We're gonna read the next section there, that's 10 to 14. And Ryan, if you wanna read that for us, please.
10 through 14, got it. Then his father went down to the woman, and Samson made a feast there, for the young men customarily did this. When they saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. Then Samson said to them, "Let me now propound a riddle to you. If you will indeed tell it to me within the 7 days of the feast, and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen wraps and 30 changes of clothes. But if you are unable to tell me, then you shall give me 30 linen wraps and 30 changes of clothes." And they said to him, "Propound your riddle, that we may hear it." So he said to them, "Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet." But they could not tell the riddle in 3 days.
I know what the answer is to the riddle.
Honey?
It's the lion.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so we're looking at the text here beginning in verse 4, and so the language, or verse 10 I should say, the language of the Bible writer about the father going down to the woman from Timnah who has been betrothed to his son Samson is to believe to be the father-in-law claiming her as his son's bride and making marriage arrangements. The feast here is a wedding feast, and it lasted 7 days and was provided by the bridegroom. Verse 11 says, when they saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. This is really the parents of the bride. Okay, so these are Philistine parents, and what you have is you don't have much of a wedding party. You have Samson and his father, perhaps his mother, and that's it. And so to sort of help them out with people sort of on the groom side, they picked people that were close to the bride side and said, well, here's some people sort of to be with you. And that's kind of how that came about. So they were provided these 30 attendants to really help celebrate the feast that was Samson here and enjoying that. Imagine a wedding feast that lasts 7 days. Typically, in our culture, you have the wedding, and then you have, afterwards, you have the reception, and it's all sort of done in one day. Here, I tell you have 7 days of feasting. Somebody's busy cooking. There's a lot of stuff
A lot
going
of
on.
stuff on both sides.
It sounds expensive too.
Yeah. It's like, well, I'm glad I'm not paying for it. Bring out some more food. We're going to just shovel it down. You gain 20 or 30 pounds by the end of that week. Yeah. Verse 12 says, then Samson said to them, let me now propound a riddle to you, if you will indeed tell it to me within the 7 days of the feast and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen wraps and 30 changes of clothes. Just a little bit about these clothes, as this would have been a very expensive wager. We think of clothes as really not having a lot of value unless you buy high ticket items. I mean, a lot of stuff is made fairly cheap in factories. But in this time period, they didn't have sewing machines. They didn't have electricity. So essentially, we're talking hand stitching. We're talking about cutting the material and making it.
We knew they wouldn't go figure it out.
Well, yeah.
So,
Yeah, he didn't think anybody's going to figure it out. So this would have been an expensive wager. And the linen wraps here, the Hebrew word means wrapper or rectangular piece of fine linen worn as outer or at night as a sole garment. So this seems to be a more expensive piece of cloth. And Jamieson, Faust, and Brown commentary on Judges says shirts, wide linen garments worn next to the body only, it would seem, by friends, or I'm sorry, of persons of rank and wealth. So they seem to be a higher quality of material. So we have Samson telling this riddle, and a riddle, according to Nelson's Illustrated Bible Dictionary, is a puzzling question posed as a problem to be solved or guessed. And so this would be done, and this would be considered part of the entertainment. So everybody's hanging out, chowing down, doing whatever. It's like, okay, this would be sort of the entertainment, is I'm going to give you this riddle. And by the way, the word propound in New American Standard means to put forward or offer for consideration. Arthur E. Kundal and Leon Morris in their Tyndall commentary on the book of Judges and Ruth says, quote, riddles were highly esteemed in the ancient world. In the generally festive atmosphere of feast, Samson's challenge was readily accepted, for the 30 men would consider the advantages of their combined wisdom and time on their side. In other words, hey, there's 30 of us, right? So one guy doesn't have to figure out, you can all sort of brainstorm together, and we got 7, so you got 30 guys, you got 7 days. Should be pretty easy.
gives him time to do what he wants to do.
Well, they should, having so many men in 7 days, they should be able to figure it out, is what they're saying. In other words, they have the advantage because they have so many more people to think about what that
But when you
means.
think about where he got that,
Yeah.
what it's really talking about, they ain't gonna guess that, I don't think. So,
Well, it doesn't seem like, from our understanding of the text, that they would have ever guessed it. But, these guys are not looking at it that way. They're thinking, man, that seems like yeah, we're going to essentially take you up on that offer because we think we can solve it. Verse 13 is sort of the reverse. But if you are unable to tell me, then you shall give me 30 linen wraps and 30 change of clothes. And they said to him, propound your riddle that we may hear it. So he said, and so we have the riddle here coming up. He said to them, verse 14, out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet, but they could not tell the riddle in 3 days. So here's 30 guys, 3 days have expired, and they have to be racking their brains like, this is really hard. I mean, it doesn't really seem like it should be, because it's it's a very short riddle, and yet, in 3 days, they're not getting it. And so what we're going to see is sort of panic set in. We're not figuring this out. We thought it was going to be easier than it was.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, how many people would actually know that honey would be inside of a lion
Yeah.
out of ordinary day-to-day
Yeah.
knowledge?
Yeah, and I think that's why Samson felt so good about that riddle, because this is kind of an anomaly. It's not something you're normally going to see. So this is really something that he knows is going to stump them, and that they shouldn't be able to guess. That's a big wager, and he would not do that if he didn't feel fairly confident that they wouldn't be able to solve it. So let's move on to the next few verses there, 15 through 20. Somebody like to read that for us? Jenna? Okay.
And it came about on the 4th day that they said to Samson's wife, entice your husband that he may tell us the riddle, lest we burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us to impoverish us? Is this not so? And Samson's wife wept before him and said, you only hate me and you do not love me. You have propounded a riddle to the sons of my people and have not told it to me. And he said to her, behold, I have not told it to my father or mother, so should I tell you? their feast lasted. And it came about on the seventh day that he told her because she pressed him so hard. She then told the riddle to the sons of her people. So the men of the city said to him on the seventh day before the sun went down, "What is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion?" And he said to them, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle." Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, and he went down to Ashkelon and killed 30 of them and took their spoil, and gave the changes of clothes to those who told the riddle. And his anger burned, and he went up to his father's house. But Samson's wife was given to his companion who had been his friend.
Okay, so it doesn't go the way that Samson thought it was going to go. And if we look here at verse 15, it says, "Then came the fourth day," so it's the fourth day, you only got 3 days after that, that they said to Samson's wife, so these are the 30 men that accepted that bet, "Entice your husband so that he will tell us the riddle, or we will burn you and your father's house with fire." And so the idea is this is a form of punishment. In other words, we are demanding that you get this answer for us, or you are going to pay a heavy penalty for not getting this information for
It
us.
sounds like they're blackmailing her.
Oh yeah, well I mean it's like give it to us or die. You figure out which one you want to do. So what we also see in the verse here is that, well, let me just talk about this word entice a little bit. So the idea of persuasion, the idea of persuading somebody to do something, and these men are desperate. There's not that many days left, and so you need to sort of pull out all the stops so that you can essentially spare your life and the life of your family members. I want you to notice at the end of verse 15 that really these 30 men, they're desperate for the answer to the riddle, and now they're essentially accusing Samson's wife of really inviting them or being part of their companions for Samson in order to really make them poor. In other words, you set us up. You said it, this is your fault. So they're basically, even though they accepted the bet, they're accusing her of really sort of fixing it so that her husband would benefit and be able to get all of this really this wealth from them as a result. So verse 16, it says Samson's wife wept before him. This is Samson, and said, "You only hate me, and you do not love me. You have propounded a riddle to the sons of my people, and have not told it to me." And he said to her, "Behold, I have not told it to my father or mother. Should I tell you?" So what we see here is Samson's wife trying to manipulate Samson. In other words, I'm gonna sort of really just sort of like, feel bad about it and be teary-eyed and all this other stuff because you have this riddle and you're not even sharing with me, and I'm your wife. And he's saying, "Hey, I didn't even tell my parents." He obviously doesn't want to tell anybody because he wants to make sure that the answer doesn't get out. But she seems to be really working on him pretty hard to try to get the answer out. And so the idea of it's like drip, 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 drip. You keep up the pressure, you keep going at it, and eventually maybe that person will crack.
I wonder why she didn't tell him that they threatened her, if she wouldn't say anything.
It is somewhat.
I wonder why she didn't tell him about the threat.
Yeah. That is something that it's one of those things where like, what, if she told him, maybe, that would make a difference. And maybe, they threatened her, even though it's not written down, and said, "You better not tell him either, because, that's going to make it worse for you." It just doesn't tell us, and we just think, well, if I tell him, they wanted me to do it, but I said no, and, you got to protect me and my family.
I was gonna say either that, or maybe she didn't actually care for him. He loves her, but maybe
Right.
she doesn't feel the same toward him.
But they should have got what if they won it, whatever it was, the
Yeah.
linens and stuff. They shouldn't have got because they cheated and stuff.
Yeah.
So Did he know that she had told them?
Oh yeah, well it comes out in the text that we read here. I mean, it's going to come to light. That is a pretty significant riddle that Samson is absolutely confident that nobody's going to be able to figure out the answer, Brother Timothy.
But on the other hand, before that, nobody knew, even the wife, they knew Samson has extraordinary powers. And as at that time, nobody has ever killed a lion. So it's difficult for the wife would have thought about it, but telling Samson would be, she will conclude will make no difference.
Right.
Because he won't have the power to stop the people and all the rest, because he never knew Samson has extraordinary powers and all the rest. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
can go the other way around.
Yeah. Yep. So the wife is working on her husband, really trying to get him to cave into her and tell her what the riddle is. She is relentless. She will not give up. And since the fourth day, she has been pressing Samson mercilessly to get the answer. And so she's using her sadness of emotions and repeated requests. And eventually Samson sort of just, he sort of breaks down. He finally caves in and he tells her the answer to the riddle. And so it says here in the New American Standard that she pressed him so hard. And this is really, the Hebrew word here means bring into straits or by importunity. And importunity means repeatedly asking for something in a forceful and annoying way. And she kept doing it over and over and over. And that finally did it. So verse 18 says, so the men of the city said to him on the seventh day, so they now have the answer. In verse 17, she told the sons of her people. Verse 18, so the men of the city said to him on the eighth day, before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? And so what he's essentially saying, they're putting it in the form of questions back to him, but they are revealing the answer to the riddle. And Samson then will say, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle. One of the things I like to do is I like to check on what the skeptics and atheists have to say about Bible passages, because I know that it's going to make their heads spin. So I'm like, I wonder what they're saying about something like this. So I have a source that I go to. It's called the Skeptics Annotated Bible, and it's online. And I go there because I just want to see what they say about stuff. And so here, obviously, the wife had betrayed her husband's trust. And the Skeptics Annotated Bible says here, verse 18, that Samson calls his wife a cow and says that the Philistines plowed with her or had sex with her. And they say, note verse 18, and they're talking about here in our scripture here, and they said, note verse 18 in the New Oxford Annotated Bible, where there in this New Oxford Annotated Bible, it says plowed with my heifer, or sexual innuendo. And what we want to see here is that Samson is not insulting his wife. He is not using a derogatory name towards her at all. What he is doing is using a proverbial saying, which the meaning is clearly understood. In other words, if you hadn't gone to my bride for the answer, you would still not know the answer to the riddle. He wasn't trying to insult her, but see, this is what happens when people really don't, love God, don't want to know the truth, and really just sort of want to put the Bible in a bad light. Really what Samson is saying is, you wouldn't have solved my riddle if you hadn't cheated. You cheated. Going to my wife and really getting the answer from her is cheating. You guys were supposed to figure this out on your own. You had 30 of you guys in 7 days, and if you guys would have figured out, wouldn't matter, if one of you guys figured it out over the 7-day period, you would have won that bet honestly, legitimately, but you cheated. This is really what he's saying here, okay? The idea here of plowed with my heifer doesn't mean anything to do in terms of having sex with her or sexual innuendo. He's really, a heifer is a female cow, and what he's essentially saying, a plow is really that crude T-shaped handle spade where the farmer would get behind it and the ox would pull it, and he would essentially cut into the ground so that they could plant seed. This is all he's doing in using this figure of speech. If you had not plowed with my heifer. Any questions about verse 18, right?
Well, I don't have a question. I was gonna say, you could kind of tell, like, I don't think it was meant to be an innuendo or whatever too, because he just married her. Like,
Yeah.
really, like, why would you go in and automatically insult
Right.
one you just love and
Right.
all this? I
But
mean,
see, that's what I'm saying is when you actually studied as we are, and you're not really trying to, people have an agenda. When you have something like this annotated Bible, the one I've been telling you about, what's the name of it? Skeptics Annotated Bible. In other words, the purpose of it isn't to find truth. The purpose of it is essentially to put something out there that will turn people away from the truth. In other words, we're going to discredit Bible writers. We're going to deny miracles. We're going to accuse God of bad behavior. In other words, it's not about having anything to do with truth. And so I just go to that because I want to hear what they're saying, and I want to be aware of that, and then sort of bring it in to some of the teaching or preaching at various times, just to sort of be aware of what these guys are saying. So, yeah, very good. Verse 19, it says, then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily. This is Samson. He went down to Ashkelon and killed 30 of them and took their spoil and gave the changes of clothes to those who told the riddle, and his anger burned, and he went up to his father's house. So Ricky said he shouldn't have had to pay, but it's obvious.
You said Ricky.
Yeah, you said you were saying.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you said he cheated, so he shouldn't have to pay. You said
Yeah.
that earlier. Okay, and that should be the case. The idea that, yeah, you cheated. He really exposed them when he said, if you hadn't plowed with my heifer, he really exposed the fact that they cheated. But, at the end of the day, they gave him the answer. And so they gave the answer within the 7 days. So
I still cheated though.
this is true. And he told them that, but he still had to pay up.
I would have paid up.
Yeah.
well, technically, he didn't pay.
Yeah,
Well-
technically he didn't pay.
He went out and
He
took
took
it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
He did pay, but he didn't pay. In other words, it didn't come out of his pocket, so to speak. He took it out of somebody else's
Right,
pocket. He took they took it from other people. So what we have here, and this is really where we need to see the fact that God is going to use Samson providentially to really go up against the Philistines, really to be antagonizing them and really fighting against them. This all sort of plays into hand. God's plan, no matter what it is, can never be thwarted.
No, it can't.
It can't, from the very beginning of human history to the very end. And so the idea is that this is going to come about. The downfall of the Philistines is going to come about whether Samson did everything right in relation to God or he didn't, because God can use so many different avenues to accomplish the same thing, because his will won't be thwarted. Sister Marvin?
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, because that's why, as I'm reading over it, and I said to myself that, this was the plan. It was already been there. God knew that
Yep.
this was going to happen.
Yep.
Because you can see before he ran down the lion,
Yep.
the Spirit of the Lord came upon him at first, and then now he killed men.
Yeah.
The Spirit of the Lord came upon. So as
Yeah.
I was reading, even with his wife, that was her part according over there to
Yeah.
do what she was supposed to do.
Yeah.
Whether she was like Gladys said, whether something was going to do it the right way, every man that was in that position, that was their part of according that they were supposed to do. Reading the Samson story, so that's how I was just thinking to myself.
Yeah. So, these guys, remember going back to 13:1, they've been under 40 years of oppression. Okay. And Samson, we're going to see verse 20, who was really a judge over Israel for 20 of those 40 years. But essentially, at the very beginning, this last judge, this unique judge, really, the parents are told that their son is going to be a judge. and he has to grow up. And once he grows up, then it's sort of like, okay, it talks about him, God stirring him up at the end of chapter 13, which means it's his time to shine. It's his time to really engage the Philistines. And it's not exactly what God wanted to happen with him marrying the Philistine wife, but God was still able to use that. He used the Pharisees, really, I mentioned this before, he used their jealousy and hatred of Christ to really ultimately fulfill his plan of Isaiah 53 and putting Christ on the cross so that he could suffer and die for humanity and be raised again. God used really the evil intentions of these people to accomplish his plan. But he's never in a situation where if this person doesn't come through for him or do something exactly, that he's in a bind where he can't, he has multiple different ways to
Well, I
accomplish
think
the
that
same
people
thing.
have all that stuff too. It could be a grander plan of getting them too. You know,
Right.
their trust, or so
Yeah.
letting them win stuff is
Yeah.
going to raise their pride and their ego.
So look what happened when Samson got mad. 30 more Philistines died. And so the idea is this is what it's going to take, is essentially really going up against them. And Samson is challenging because right now they're ruling over his people. And Samson is doing something that they're not used to any of the Israelites doing. He's standing up against them. He's fighting against them. He's killing them. And this is really about, really the beginnings of trying to break them free from that oppression. Yeah. Remember here the words, verse 19 here. It says, then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily. Mightily here, the Hebrew word brings out the idea of it rushed upon him suddenly. And this is really, when we hear this about Samson, about the Spirit of the Lord coming upon him, it's like in the way of supernatural strength. And so the idea that he has an incredible amount of strength, and it's not going to be anything that's too difficult for him to do when he acts with that strength to accomplish what God wants him to accomplish. So he goes to a place called Ashkelon, and you'll recall that it's one of the 5 principal cities of the Philistines, Joshua 13, verse 3. And I'm reading this from Nelson's Illustrated Bible Dictionary. It said Ashkelon is situated 12 miles north of Gaza. Ashkelon and her sister cities Ashdod, Gath, Gaza, and Ekron posed a serious threat to the Israelites during the period of the Judges. And so this is what he does. He goes down there. He kills those 30 men from that city. He gathers the items of clothing that he owes to these men in Timnah and essentially gives it to them to pay off his debt. And so everything essentially is good. He paid his debt, but 30 Philistines died as he paid off that debt. And the Bible says here that his anger burned. And this Hebrew word here sort of brings out the idea of intense or consuming anger. In other words, you're seeing red. You're suddenly very, very angry. So imagine a guy with super strength, and the idea that he's been cheated on this deal. His wife betrayed him, and he goes down to Ashkelon. Those 30 men he comes across as a bad scene because he's really angry.
I just thought of something that's kind of funny. I was telling Jenna, I was like, can you imagine after this is all done and he's got these clothes and he's giving them here you go, here. What's this stuff all over it? Why is there a big hole?
Oh, you might have to
in my-
wash them. They're a little bloody. Some of them got a little bloody. Yeah, you guys wash them. I just took them off the guy, so they've been sweating here. Right? Here you go. You guys have to wash them out. Okay, so verse 20 says, but Samson's wife was given to his companion who had been his friend. And it seems like we're talking about one of those 30 Philistine companions. And what we need to know here is that Samson doesn't know this. Verse 19 says he went up to his father's house, and his father's house is, he lives in a place called Zorah. So he does not know this. And it's going to be a real problem when we get into chapter 15. So let me see here. What I want to. Yeah, so I want to talk just a little bit about why Samson's wife was given to another man. I want you to just sort of think about that a little bit. Why do you suppose that instead of Samson having this wife, that really the father-in-law might give his daughter to another man at the end of that wedding feast?
I'm thinking maybe because of what Samson did.
Did what?
I'm thinking maybe because of what happened at the end where he killing that 30 men and bringing the spoil clothes and
Okay,
throwing it at
okay.
them. Maybe did himself was kind of because that's something to make him more angry.
Yeah.
Because it is a wife that he came for, that he loved,
Okay,
and then not taking her and giving her to somebody else may sprinkle
Okay.
more anger within
right.
him.
So his wife betrayed his trust.
Mhm.
And essentially, after this was over, he lost the bet. He went and got all of the stuff from Ashkelon to fulfill his debt. And where did he go? He went back to his home in Zorah, but his wife remained back home. Okay? So the problem is that I think John Gill's exposition of the Bible brings out a pretty good understanding of what had happened. He says, quote, by her father and with her consent, both being affronted and provoked by Samson leaving her, who judged her not only to be injured, but hereby discharged him and free to marry another. So he brings out, so the idea seems to be that, you've essentially humiliated her family. I mean, at the end of 7 days, this is a done deal. You've humiliated her family. You were angry with your wife. And instead of sort of being with your wife, you just left her. So what are we supposed to think? We're thinking, well, you're disgusted with her. You want nothing to do with her. And here we have all these wedding guests and everything. And everybody's wondering what's happened. And so really despair, really the moment of embarrassment and really the indignity that Samson did to them. It's like, well, okay, you can marry this one right here. And everything's done. So this is going to be troublesome when we get into chapter 15. Okay, any questions about those last few verses there in chapter 14? If not, I want to talk a little bit before we get to 15. I don't know if we'll get to 15, but just really talk about Samson himself. And in doing so, we want to go to Hebrews chapter 11. And Hebrews chapter 11 is known as the Faith Hall of Fame.
That's what I thought.
And the Hebrew writer is going to mention people of faith in this chapter. And, well, let's read verse 32. Brother Timothy, do you have Hebrews 11:32?
Okay.
You want to read that for us, please?
11:22. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about you. Barak, Samson, Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets.
Okay, and just read verse 33 and 34 too, please.
Who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions.
Okay, and then verse 34, please.
34. Quenched the fury of the flames and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies.
Okay, so here what we have is we're talking about by faith, Jacob and Isaac and Moses, and then we have Rahab in verse 31. Then we're really talking about by faith, talking about Gideon. Gideon, Barak, and Jephthah are earlier judges that ruled over Israel. And Samson's name is mentioned. One of the things is when we read about Samson a lot of times, even though he's a really strong guy and that's really impressive, his character seems to be lacking. And so we've already seen that, Samson is a guy that, he doesn't seem very self-controlled. I mean, he he is really ignoring what God wanted for him in terms of where to find a wife, and he just essentially marries whoever he's going to marry. He disregards the caution and the wisdom of the parents. And so sometimes when we read that, it's hard to read that, and then we get to Hebrews chapter 11 and we go, wow, this is the same guy he's mentioned here. What we're going to find out that a lot of times some of these other ones that we've read earlier are the same way. You know, Abraham, he's mentioned as a hero of faith in Hebrews chapter 11, but on two different occasions he lied about his status of his wife, said it was his sister.
That was because they threatened to either kill her or
Right.
something, brothers, sisters.
Right, so we're talking about Pharaoh or another king killing. In other words, these people in power, these kings, have enough to essentially take his wife, but they're men of respect. They're not just going to take your wife. If you're married to her, we're just going to kill you, and then we'll have a problem with her being married to you, and then we'll take her. And so Abraham's afraid for his life, and he said, well, tell him you're my sister, which is sort of a half-truth. They share the same father, but they have different mothers. But he's doing it really to lie about the situation. But here, you know, he's mentioned in the Faith Hero Hall of Fame. So is Rahab was lying about the spies. Okay, right?
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you there or anything. I was just saying, I think, you know, Samson gets better as it progresses. You know, he starts out and we get to see his character and short fuse and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But in the end, he really changes his life when it matters most, I suppose. You know?
I think sometimes we can get one impression from the Old Testament passages and then get a different impression from like here in Hebrews chapter 11. In other words, are these guys, is the Hebrew writer just glossing over all of their errors and their mistakes? And the answer would be, well, no, he can't be. He obviously has to be aware of all these things that these guys that did as less than perfect. But what we've got to keep in mind is that the imperfections did not typify their life. Ricky.
I think this is also showing the Christian, you know, you start out, you know, you're sloppy,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't continue. You strive to study.
Right.
You strive to have faith.
Right.
Faith is the substance of things hoped for.
Right.
A confident expectation. So we hope, you know,
Yeah.
like Ruth did, you know, she lost 2 sons. There's a lot of things that happened, but she kept having faith
Right.
in the face of bad times and stuff. And as the Christian grows and learns faith, but you got to practice at it. You can't just,
Right.
you know, just read and that's it.
Right.
You got to be a doer
Right.
and stuff.
Right. So faith is when you first start having faith in God. Faith is not your faith is not mature, and it's not a strong faith. It's actually when you essentially go through a process of growth and maturity to develop a strong faith. Brother George.
Yeah, what we look at is that sometimes it's good to listen to your parents,
Right.
but if you disregard your parents because you have the power,
Right.
sometimes the person meet up with failure
Yeah.
or problem ahead, especially in the time of marriage.
Yeah.
When the parent told him that
Yeah.
is there no woman here in our region
Right.
that you will marry, then
Yeah.
you're going elsewhere, he should have listened.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Because.
Advice, but he did not.
Yeah, he shouldn't have, he should have recognized that your parents are acting in your best interest, and your parents are not in the bubble of love, and they're able to be an objective and look into it and see whether maybe things that you are overlooking, that their persons has some flaws in their life that essentially you know is not going to be good for your son or daughter. You're going to say something. And so the idea of your parents is not like, you know, once they graduate high school, you know, just do whatever. The idea is once a parent, always a parent. You're going to be that. You're going to speak up. You're going to say something. And so the idea of disregarding parents have life experience. Children don't. This is why children, you know, when you get kids that are, you know, at a certain age, and they start thinking you don't know what you're talking about, you know, that, you know, we're young and invincible. They think, you know, at their perspective, they understand everything, but they don't. They don't have life's experience. And this is why you have parents to guide you in making those important decisions, because most of the big mistakes that people make in life is usually when they're young, not when they're at older age. And so the idea that you would just sort of disregard parents' wisdom would be a terrible thing to do, especially in their culture. That would have been considered a real no-no in those times, because the age were people you looked up to.
The worst part is to ignore God.
Right.
Because God knows the best.
Yep.
And stuff you should strive to do, even though it's hard,
Right.
do what God has to
Yep.
say.
Yep.
It's the trials, tribulations.
And the parents tried to tell them that, and what they were saying was, is not, hey, we just don't like her. They were saying, you shouldn't marry her because you're supposed to be married, God's people. Let me give Sister Mabin a chance, and I'll come to you, Sister Nawai. Mabin, did you have something?
Yeah, I just want to just measure about the experience with parents and, you know, children don't have experience with. So I'm laughing myself here because my 5 years old, you will want to get his shower and he will tell you, Mommy, I can do it by myself. You know, so it just popped in my head like, yeah, that's how children think. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
They're 5
I'm
going on
40 years,
25.
but he can do it by himself.
Yeah. Sister Nawai?
Yes, the parent advising because our they might have known the relationship between them and the Philistine, maybe they were not good. The parent knew after that, so they try to tell their son not to marry into their family, but he didn't listen
Yeah.
to them.
Well, it was actually against the law of Moses because they were idolaters. And so the Israelite people were to stay to themselves, so they wouldn't give their daughters, and they would be essentially brought into to adulterers or idolaters and be part of that, or marry their daughters and bring idolatry into the Israelites. You married your own people. That was part of the law of Moses, and he had disregarded it. The parents brought it up to him, and he disregarded, you know, what they were saying in terms of, this is the law of Moses, and we're trying to help you, son. But he wouldn't listen.
Well, the Israelites were just Jews, weren't they?
Yeah,
God's
they're-
people.
right, so they
you can't
get-
sit within the Jews.
Right, so they become known as the Jews in the New Testament, but in the Old Testament they're called Israelites.
But God, the mysteries of God was bringing in the Gentiles.
Yeah. Yeah,
eventually,
well, that's,
so-
yeah, it's way
And
down the
women
road. Yeah.
Jews, so yeah.
Right, so they were to marry their own people, the Israelites. So let's throw a few things out here before we run out of time, and that is that in looking at the characters and the Faith Hall of Fame is when you go back to the Old Testament, you're going to see those character flaws. But what we need to recognize is that these are the exceptions to the rule. In other words, these people overall had the kind of faith that pleased God. If they don't, then the Hebrew writer is mistaken about including them. In other words, the whole of their life, they had the faith that God was looking for. And so when we see some of the flaws in the Old Testament, we should not think, well, this guy is so flawed, or this gal is so flawed. How in the world could they be mentioned in the Hebrews chapter 11 unless the Hebrew writer just doesn't know the facts of it? So the idea is he does know the facts, the Hebrew writer, and he's essentially saying this is a representation of their whole life, is that these were people of faith. And so what I want to do is just touch on a few things here before we run out of time. And even though Samson was self-willed, he refused the wise counsel of his parents, Samson's overall life could be described as one governed by his faith in Jehovah. All had blemishes to overcome. We're talking about all these people mentioned in the Faith Hall of Fame, but all overcame them to live lives that were dedicated to the service of God. Divine approval of an individual in one aspect of his life does not entail and must not be extended to mean that there is divine approval of that individual in all aspects of his character or conduct. And I'm getting this from a Denton lectureship book on the book of Judges. And what we see is that as we continue to study about Samson, is that he did have faith in God. He's going to pray to God. God is going to answer his prayer. And in the end, he doesn't become an idolater. He essentially saves his people. He delivers his people from the oppression of the Philistines. Okay, any last minute thoughts or questions about that?
Yeah, thank you for also bringing me to this, Hebrews chapter 11, because I didn't see it, earlier, like the way you have explained. You know, many of the time we quick to point at others, like, oh, this person is this, this person is that, but then, like, you know how the Bible, I think in the book of Samuel, when, Samuel went down for David, and
Yep.
the Lord said, you look at the appearance.
Not the
Then look
outside.
at the appearance.
Right,
But,
Inside.
not the inside.
Right.
You can see here because the scripture record that, you know, these people was what they said, who through faith subdued
Right.
kingdoms.
right?
You understand? They trusted God.
Yep.
So if you're looking at the appearance from outside, you will quick come into condemnation that this
Yeah.
person was wicked, the
Yeah.
person was this.
Right,
But through the eyes of God, he was using them
Right.
to overcome their enemies,
Yeah.
and that's what God was pleased with.
Yeah.
So it just brought me to that conclusion, not to be
Right.
so quick to judge others, because you don't know where God
Right.
is using them at.
right.
Until,
So,
you know.
I think just a little bit, when Samson confronted the Philistines, that's where God was using him. God didn't use him to say, I want you to marry this woman, which would have been disobedience, but God essentially used it, sometimes his misactions, to accomplish his will. And I said this before, and I think it's worthy of repeating, is that if we never seen, in Hebrews chapter 11, if we went back to these faith heroes in the Old Testament, and nothing was said about them ever sinning or doing anything wrong, there would be no way that we could relate to them, because we think, well, we know that we do things wrong. We don't always get it right, so how are we supposed to be encouraged by people that never made any mistakes? And so, well, the skeptic grabs a hold of it and says, look, these guys aren't perfect. God isn't saying you've got to be perfect to be in faith. You essentially have to live a righteous life, and you're striving to live for the Lord every day, but all of us make mistakes from time to time. And so that we're not hypocritical, we repent of our sins and we confess our sin to God. But the idea that the outside world says, you're a Christian and have the expectation that you never sin is unrealistic, both from God and from the standpoint that they're looking at it. The idea is God is not expecting sinless perfection. He'd be expecting something that we could never do. What he is expecting is us to die to sin, to be people of faith, to obey him. And when we look at that, and we look at the Old Testament heroes of faith, this is how they were. I mean, they weren't perfect. Abraham lied, Rahab lied, other things happened. David committed adultery. He was responsible for the murder of Bathsheba's husband. They sinned, they made mistakes. But these are the exception to the rule in their life. Overall, the Hebrew writer is saying, overall, they were people of faith. And so it suggests to me that these people who had all did the wrong thing in the Old Testament and are mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11 must have repented and must have been truly people that were committed to God, even though those imperfections are noted in the Old Testament.
Do your best is what, you know,
Do your best.
that's what I tell Brian too, you know, if you're doing your best, you're not gonna fall from grace, but if,
Right.
you know, so if one keeps doing sins that they know they're not supposed to be doing over and over,
Right.
you know, you're in danger and
Yeah,
stuff, so.
yeah, you don't
that's-
practice sin. Practicing sin is what you don't want to do. I want to thank those who be able to watch this video. Hopefully it was encouraging to you, and Lord willing, we will have another video a week from today. God bless you.